A moment first off about the federal budget. Well, first off, there's no chance that any federal budget, probably any federal government, is going to be able to satisfy a majority of the people because it's based on a massive fallacy perpetrated by politicians that governments can do just about anything. Unfortunately, financial reality is the bucket of cold water that reminds us that it can't. It's interesting to see all the complaints about the federal budget, any federal budget though. There's no way it could satisfy the incredible number of groups who want government to take more of someone else's money and put it toward their pet projects, whether it's something like subsidized daycare or free university tuition. The demand's made all the more difficult to meet by the fact that all three levels of government combined already take about half the income of a huge chunk of Canadians, and the deficit is already about 2.5 times higher than originally promised. The straightforward reality is that governments can't do everything, and nowhere is that more evident when it comes to promises about the economy. The majority of Canadians and media bought into what I would argue is the biggest fiction about government peddled today, and that is governments can manage or control the economy. Maybe it makes us feel better to think they could. You don't have to look any further than the last federal election to see how often that line was offered up and repeated. You had questions like, which leader is the best choice to manage the economy? Gosh, that's nonsense. And it can be exposed with even a moment of thought. Our government did not control any of the major factors that have had the biggest impact on our economy and chances on you over the past several years. They had nothing to do with the oil price decline, or the fall in commodity prices in general, or the fallout from the subprime mortgage crisis. They don't control the currency. They're not even the biggest driver of interest rates. But despite these obvious facts, the common political narrative suggests that with the right policies, the right prime minister, the right party in power, governments can manage or control the economy. Well, that's simply not true. And there's tons of evidence to suggest it's not true. Actually, it's more dangerous than that, given that the evidence is clear that the more government intervenes, the worse the results. I don't have to go with examples like the Soviet Union or the former Soviet Union, Venezuela or Cuba. All you have to do is look at the European Union with its massive bureaucracy administering a regulatory burden that has killed entrepreneurialism, has produced double-digit unemployment, significant sovereign debt problems, an unstable banking system, and flatlining economic growth. Those are the results of governments that think they can control the economy or manage the economy. More to the point, what's incredible and dangerous is when the policies in place don't produce the jobs or the economic growth, and that's the constant narrative. The rationale is that governments actually didn't do enough. They haven't spent enough money. So what do? They increase borrowing and they raise taxes. The government's answer to our economic problems is always the same. Hey, let's do more government in the form of higher taxes and more regulation. Often more borrowing, more spending. That's the opposite of what needs to be done. Government does have a role to play. They've got to create a tax and regulatory environment that attracts capital investment. They know that already, which is why they're so worried about the tax changes that the Trump administration's talking about. We had it good under President Obama, whose constant push for higher taxes in business and upper income individuals made it better to be in Canada. They had more government regulation too. Canada was an attractive destination for capital investment. That's why, if you remember, Burger King moved their head office to Canada when they bought Tim Hortons. But Donald Trump is talking about changing that very dramatically. The challenge is made all the more difficult in Canada because we got the two other levels of government to take into account. We always talk about the feds, but that's not the story. You've got to look at the anti-growth policies that are enacted at both the municipal and the provincial level. All you're asking is this a disincentive for people to invest their capital? That's the key to economic growth. I don't think I have to go any further than Ontario and Alberta. In evaluating government policies in the economy, I think it's very straightforward. You just simply have to ask, does the policy make it more attractive or less attractive to invest in the city, the province, or the country? So if you're assessing the federal budget in terms of does it make it more or less attractive for capital investment, Unfortunately, it's a big yawn. The good news, by the way, and I was relieved when I saw the federal budget, that it was not the tax and grab budget that was all the talk in the lead-up. I was relieved they didn't change capital gains taxes. That would have been a disaster. So I'll pat Finance Minister Morneau on the back for that. But the bad news is it also did nothing concrete to encourage capital investment. It was not an aggressive document. Lots of talk. But the symbolism in talk doesn't get it done in the economic realm. I think innovation was mentioned 261 times. I mean, there was a huge list. But the economy responds to concrete examples. In the same way that you make investments, people and businesses make their capital investments. So, as I say, good news, it didn't make it worse. Bad news, it didn't make it better.